Hello and welcome to another episode of Rethinking Legal Ops. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold today, but everyone, welcome to another episode of Rethinking Legal Ops. I'm Ashwarya, Head of Legal and Partnerships at Speed Legal, your host, and today we have another amazing guest with us, Tessa Manuello. She is the CEO and founder of Legal Creatives, which is doing amazing work in changing the way people look at legal documents and helping lawyers and professionals leverage the amazing powers of legal design in their careers and their work. Wonderful to have you here, Tessa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to share.
Thank you. And it's even more exciting to have you here on Rethinking Legal Ops because this is where we have conversations about how the integration of law and technology are changing the way we practice law. And just from our conversation a couple of minutes ago, we were just discussing how there is such a big role for legal design to play in this digital transformation of law. And I can't wait to unpack that a little bit more with you. But before just to start things off, I'd love to learn about what has been your professional journey so far and how did you end up with working with legal design?
Well, thank you for the question. My professional journey, I could start a long time ago. I could start at 16, but I'm going to make it short. And just to say, well, briefly, I started working in France, where I was born, hence the French accent a little bit. In arbitration. So I started to work in the field of arbitration. That was about 15 years ago, when at the time arbitration was booming in the industry, in France, especially because of the International Chamber of Commerce, where I was working, managing cases at the Chamber of Commerce, and realizing it already at that time that although arbitration is supposed to be a much faster way to resolve disputes, I still was a little bit shocked by how complex it could become and how expensive it could get as well. And so at that time, there was very little technology, there was very little innovation. So after some years working there, I have to say I felt a little bit hopeless about what kind of impact I can have, given everything in law is so traditional. And I felt like I could not really actualize myself in that very traditional environment. And so I decided to just, quit my job, quit the organization, quit even country and continent. And I moved to Canada, where I decided to explore new avenues. And this is where I discovered entrepreneurship. This is where I discovered innovation. And this is where I discovered creativity. And when I found out about creativity as a structured methodology for solving problems and innovating, I just fell in love with it. And so I decided to bring this into the law. So I went back to university. I acquired my third master after one in Sorbonne, then one in South Africa. That was the third one I got in University of Sherbrooke in Canada. And I used that to really work on the research as to how we can use creative thinking in the legal universe to be able to innovate. And that was really bold at the time. It was not something that was very well known. That was back in 2014, I guess. So that was very, very early. This is actually at the same time that Stanford Legal Design Lab did the experiments, but at the time it was not known, so I had no idea about it. And I came to know about legal design as a thing, as a name, much later in this process. And hence here I am teaching legal professionals on the Legal Creatives platform online how to use this methodology, how to use the tools, and how to be able to innovate.
I love that. That really resonates with me when you're talking about creativity and innovation and just like this new way of thinking about legal work. When I was in law school, it was everything was sort of like taught in a very straightforward manner. Like this is the black letter of the law. This is a case. You read this, you apply, and you advise your clients and do your work in that way. But I'm sort of loving this movement of changing that, adding creativity to legal work because there's just so much scope for that, and thanks to people like you, that's happening. So Tessa, what do you think? Can you unpack a little bit more as to what is wrong with the way we approach our legal documents and the way we draft our contracts today?
Well, the major problem we see is that legal documents, contracts, policies are drafted for other lawyers. So we are drafting everything thinking that another lawyer or potentially a judge is going to have to use the document, when in fact, especially for contracts, the main user of the contract is the business owner, basically the client. The client is supposed to be the most important user of the document, because in the legal design methodology, we talk about users. We don't really say talk about parties. It's like, who are the people, the professionals that are going to have to use the document or to complete the task we want them to complete. So in this case of the contract, it will be to comply with the contract, to perform the obligations of the contract, maybe to refrain from doing, forgetting deadlines, and because we want the contract to be a tool to empower the parties to accomplish, a good, let's say it's a business, to just solidify a business relationship so they can achieve the business goals and objectives. So when we start to think of a contract like a business document, or at least that's something that would give the foundations to help the business grow and flourish, and that the people that are actually going to have to use the information in the contract are actually non-lawyers, then this is where we have a big challenge to overcome, because how can we expect non-lawyers to understand all this technical language? And by using technical language, what we do is we just exclude them from the equation, and then we just use the document to argue between lawyers or in front of a judge as to who's right and who's wrong. So what if we change this approach and start adopting a more user-centric approach to doing contracts, thinking about the user? In which language should I communicate to make sure that my user is going to understand and use the information? And that's a great way to deliver value, because the value is going to be perceived by the user, is going to be received by the user, and that is going to help also give a lot of benefits for legal professionals who use this methodology.
Absolutely. And I do want to emphasize one of the things you said as to how can we effectively communicate, and what language do we effectively communicate when we're going through these sort of negotiations or closing these like transactions. So Tessa, how do you think lawyers can communicate more effectively? I mean, you would think that lawyers, like, we're taught oral and written communication, we're trained in it, but at the same time, I often feel like we are trained to communicate well with other lawyers, maybe, but perhaps not as well with non-lawyers. So what is your perspective on how lawyers can communicate better without using legalese or jargon?
Well, there's a lot of techniques that can be used to make the legal communication more effective when it comes to drafting contracts, for example. And it's a great question, because I just recently delivered a mini workshop on this topic. So I have all this knowledge really fresh in my mind, which is really great, because there are so many tools that we don't even know exist that we can use to communicate more effectively the information, starting with just creating a better information layout of the document. We see that documents and contracts are drafted as blocks of text, which make it really difficult for anyone, as a matter of fact, lawyers included, to process the information. When we start reorganizing the information in the document and finding different categories and connecting those categories and highlighting important information, and we start to make the document a lot easier to process, to scan, for the information to be also easier to be searched and to be remembered. In fact, there's great research that mentioned that using those methodologies can speed up negotiation, also increase information retention. So just reorganizing the way the information is presented is already a great step. Of course, if you can simplify the language using plain language, then it gets even better, because your sentences are shorter, your paragraphs are also well organized, and then that makes it a lot easier for the user to understand the information and to be able to use it and to comply with it. Then, of course, there's visuals. So in addition to the organization layout and the plain language, you can use visuals in your contract. In fact, there is nothing that says that it is forbidden to add visuals in contracts. In fact, on the contrary, there's a lot of research that indicates that using visuals makes the information a lot more effective, Because when you present, for example, a flow chart to explain different steps instead of just text, it's just a lot easier to understand the trigger events that users need to pay attention, instead of trying to figure out if this happened, then that is going to happen, unless, all of notwithstanding, this is just very complicated for non-lawyers to understand. So using flowcharts, using graphics, using icons, aligning those icons, making it easy to scan, easy to process, easy to remember and to understand. So those are just a few of the strategies that can be used to communicate effectively. But the legal design is a lot more than that, because we can think of making this contract digital. We can think of automating this contract, integrating technology, AI, even changing the way we work together or the way we deliver the service to the customer. So legal design is a lot more than the communication, but those are some strategies from the design thinking approach that we can use for contracts, but just being mindful that it is a lot more than just the communication and using the visuals, actually.
Absolutely. That really resonates with me. And I really like the way you put it in sort of steps. Like, let's start with just reorganization, and then perhaps, we can move on to change the language. And I really like how you sort of put it, like, using sort of that if-when logic that, a lot of people can easily understand, rather than saying notwithstanding or provided that and therefore, and therefore, like, which is even,
exactly, breaking it down into steps and making the steps more visual with flowcharts and other infographics makes the information more visually appealing, more interesting as well, and easier to understand. So there's lots of benefits from using it from the perspective of the lawyer as well as the perspective of the client.
Yes, absolutely. And, I was once joking with a professor of mine, and they said that, he was talking about how he finally understood that we got legal language wrong. The way we drafted is when he was trying to draft a document, and there were so many like typos that showed up on his like Grammarly tab, and they were all just legalese. It was like notwithstanding, therefore, because the dictionary thought it was therefore instead of therefore, and things like that. And he was like, even like this is not part of regular grammar. Like, I don't know why we're still using that. And so, Tessa, you were talking about how we can integrate more technology, alongside legal design, and communicate better, close transactions faster. What kind of legal technology tools do you think are very, very applicable, in combination with legal design, that can actually make these processes go much more faster and more efficiently?
Well, in fact, in terms of tools, so there are many design tools that can be used, and there are many technological tools that can be used, and legal technology that can be used. So there's lots of tools we can cover, but maybe starting with the legal tech tools, because that's what you mentioned, especially. So legal technology is obviously going to be a major accelerator for lawyers to process the work and to deliver the outcomes to the client, because that's what clients want, outcomes. They don't want to buy time. They want the problems to be solved or their objectives to be reached. So how can we start to think about delivering outcomes to the client? Well, technology is going to be a huge accelerator, because it can help in so many ways. Just make automated some tasks, automating some redundant tasks, or even using artificial intelligence to do legal research, and making also the interaction between the lawyer and the customer a lot more digital friendly, online. So there's lots of tools that can be used, but I think where the legal design methodology works well is to be able to understand which tool is going to be the most suitable tool to achieve the goal. Because what legal design does is it helps understand the real problems that needs to be solved. And very often what happens is we think we need technology, but just because it's trendy or it's fancy or that's what we're supposed to do. But it's even more effective to integrate technology when we know exactly what are the problems we would like to solve. And so legal design is helping us understand with clear and precision what are the challenges we would like to solve. And so by doing this, then it's easier to find the right technology and to also help our users, so in this case, it would be most likely legal professionals, to adopt the tool and to make sure that the tool we use is going to be easy to adopt. Or if it's too difficult to adopt the tool, then how can we make this process easier? So legal design goes well with legal technology in the sense that it helps understand what are the problems we want to solve and what tools could potentially be the best tool to solve that problem. So whether it's digital transformation, whether it's automation, whether it's just overall efficiency or increasing customer loyalty, there are so many challenges we can tackle using legal design and legal technology. So I don't think it's one or the other. It should go hand on hand. And I don't think we have seen that enough yet in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to circle back to something that we were actually just talking about before we went live, and we were talking about communication between the legal team and the and non-lawyer team members. Tessa, can you explain how important it is to have that sort of collaborative, synchronization between these two teams, and the importance of teamwork and where communication about legal issues fits into the equation?
Yeah, well, in terms of teamwork and communication, legal design can definitely help in the sense that it gives a structured approach to be able to take into account different perspectives and to be able to process those different insights and turn them into solutions that would be highly relevant to solve the problem. Because again, legal design starts with a challenge. We always start a legal design project or process with a challenge. And at times, framing the challenge is also a project within the project because it is the most critical step, given it's the first step, and we want to make sure we have established the right visions and we have understood also the right problem. And so then when we think about working with non-lawyers or other business units in an organization, we want to be able to integrate their point of view. But just, walking through the door, going on a Zoom call and asking for their feedback or ideas is not an effective way to do that. In fact, the legal design methodology is giving us clear steps that we can use to be able to collect those feedbacks, use the insights, and turn them into something that will become meaningful because we use our creativity, we prototype, we test. And so using those steps, it becomes a lot easier to integrate the ideas of non-lawyers to take into account their perspective, to understand their needs, their expectations, and so we can better provide the service.
I love that. Especially the part where you're talking about integrating, the skill sets and, like the knowledge of other, non-lawyer team members and creating innovative legal solutions, not just providing legal advice, because, traditionally it's been that, issues go to the legal, then they give out advice, and then the rest of the team, like, to decide what to do with it. But it would be just so much more, so much better if they could just work together, which leads me to the next question, Tessa, and which is about how have you seen the role of in-house counsels or in-house legal teams evolve over time from just being, this like separate department to strategic business partners today?
Well, this evolution is unfolding right now with legal design, but also legal ops, legal technology, legal project management. Also, legal project managers have also a huge contribution in this field. And so what we are seeing now today is more and more in-house lawyers wanting to acquire those skills, wanting to learn more about legal ops, legal design, legal project management, legal technology, including communication and collaboration, so we can maximize teamwork. So what we see today is that those professionals who dare to be a little bit bolder and maybe a bit more creative actually find themselves to be more successful, because that's what is needed and required in today's world where everything changed so fast, where the problems we need to solve are so much more complex. There is not necessarily one single solution to a legal problem. Although there is one truth, but the way then to also implement the solution and make sure the solution is going to stick with the users. All of that needs to be taken into account. So what we are seeing is a lot more professionals interested to learn and being able to use this knowledge actually fairly quickly. I was talking to some of our members earlier today and yesterday, and it's just amazing how quick they are able to use what they learn, because, well, it's practical. It's about practicing the skills and using the techniques to try new things, to experiment, and to be able also to have the courage to do it and not just talk about it.
Absolutely. And when you're designing, in your work, when you're deciding like courses and, educational materials to teach people exactly this, like practicing their skill maybe a little bit differently, with like a fresher perspective, with like, integrating a new skill, legal design, into the way they practice law. What are the key considerations that you keep in mind while designing your own courses?
Well, when designing courses specifically and educational material, you always have to think about the outcome and the final output you would like the student to be able to accomplish. It's not about my output as a trainer, as a teacher, as a coach. It's about the student, the person who's learning. When I say student, I mean legal professionals who are learning this. And so what do I want them to be able to do once they have the material? And so the idea is to break down all of the steps in a very practical manner, very precise as well, because you don't want to leave any room for confusion. So what I always do is I always think, how can I teach this in a way that is going to be very actionable? Step-by-step process, easy to understand, easy to apply, without necessarily, missing out on the precision, but making it like really, really practical. And I think this is what is missing in law school today, or even to some extent in the legal continuing education. What we learn is so theoretical, and then it is left for the lawyer to be able to understand how to apply this in practice. When the way I teach is 80% of practice and 20% of theory. And the reason for that is especially because of legal design is a methodology that is you can only get the benefits and even get to understand how it works once you apply it. And so because it can be a little difficult to apply it in the real life for the first time, we do offer a lot of space to actually experiment and practice within our immersion programs. So instead of just, saying here how you would do what we call the user research, which means understanding the needs of the customer and going through some rounds of interviews to understand the needs, instead of just giving the theory and then hoping people are going to do the interview themselves and it's going to go perfect, which would not be the case. We do the interviews, we do practice during the immersion. So I think this practical element is so important when we teach, and when we teach also to the future lawyers, to be able to be more business oriented and not just focused on the law. So I think today we see a huge challenge for law schools and law students, because the law is unfortunately not enough. Law is like, you need to know it to become a legal professional, but you need to know communication, you need to know technology. You probably also would benefit tremendously from knowing a little bit of psychology and behaviors, human behaviors, and maybe using some design skills, like purely design, to communicate better with visuals, and just so much more. There's so much more we need to learn, and how to collaborate with others, how to work with other professionals to be able to better understand them, and to work in a multidisciplinary manner or interdisciplinary manner, which is really integrating the knowledge to create something new.
Totally. And, this reminds me of one of the conversations I had actually in this podcast in a previous episode with Kevin Keller. And he was talking about how his skills as an engineer, he went to engineering school before he became a lawyer, actually also help him, be a better lawyer, because he could just leverage all these additional skills. So when you were talking about, this interdisciplinary approach to, learning the law, I really love that. I think
Mhm.
that it's especially important because as a science, law exists within the sphere of society, and there's so much that goes on in the society. It cannot be separated from all these other disciplines, especially when it comes to law that actually regulates technology. There has to be a technical element to that particular law as well. So I really appreciate how you put it there. It is now time for some of our audience questions that we welcome.
Nice.
So my first question that I have here is someone asks, at what stage in your legal career do you need to start learning about legal design? Can you learn it at a later stage in your career if you've been practicing for a while already?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, there is, I think how can I say that? There is no, it's not because you have practiced for 30 years or even 40 years that legal design won't be useful. I think legal design is useful whether you are an experienced lawyer or even a young practitioner. The earlier you learn, the better it gets, because what we see is if, when we think of law school, we are training law students to work in a very traditional way. And so the problem with that is once law students enter the market, there's a bit of a disconnect between what the market expects to get from lawyers and what they have been trained to do. So obviously, if we were to teach legal design earlier in the education, that would help to avoid having young lawyers already kind of so anchored into this really traditional way of practicing. And I don't say that it is bad to be a traditional lawyer and that it is better to be using legal design, but I just say depending on what the market needs, and the market tend to want more and more of those more innovative lawyers that are able to really understand the problems. And recently I have an example. We had a Web3 legal design hackathon. So we were discussing and exploring solutions for the legal challenge of Web3 and NFTs and DAOs. And it was so interesting because we had the business community there, and they were so impressed by the quality of the work and the way lawyers work because of this innovative approach. And so there are still clients that will want a traditional lawyer, but we're seeing more and more interest from a more innovative approach. So if we were to teach that earlier in the process, it would definitely be helpful, but there is no deadline or timeline. You can learn this at any point in your career. As long as you have an open mind and you are ready to explore something that could potentially be very different, because in the legal design, according to the methodology, we are exploring the point of view of the user. So we are doing this shift of perspective. So when we design a contract, for example, we take the perspective of the user, which is a very different perspective from the perspective of the lawyer. So as long as we are open to embracing a new way to do things, and that we are willing to experiment, and also willing to ask for the feedback, because feedback is very important in the methodology that we do through what we call user tests to make sure that actually the new design works better than the previous one. We never make hypotheses. We never say because it has visuals, it's better. In fact, sometimes visuals can be even worse because they are not precise enough and they can be very confusing and misleading. So we always want to test to make sure our users actually understand the information. And so to do that, it requires an open mind. It requires an interest to learn something new, to experiment, and to be able then to do that professionally with their own customers. So I have in our community, I have like lawyers who have 30, 35 years of experience, and some of them who have just 5 or 10 years of experience. And it's just so great to be able to see everybody supporting each other on this journey to learning the methodology and to applying it for different objectives. Some of them are working in the legal edition. Others are working in construction. Some are working with business and startups. And so everyone has different spheres of expertise, but the same objective to want to learn and to be more user-centric.
Exactly. And you know how they tell you in law school that like a lawyer is, I think, a constant student. I think we all are in general in life, but I think with like lawyers we also have this element of continuing legal education. So I think, like as you said, never too late to learn.
Yeah, never too late. Absolutely.
um,
Never too late.
I love that. And so the next question is legal design a separate area of legal practice of its own? And if so, do you see companies and law firms hiring legal design professionals in addition to in-house or other attorneys?
Yes, absolutely. So we're starting to see more and more legal design becoming a profession in itself and a field of practice. So that means professionals who have a legal background and have a very are very interested in doing this like full time, wanting to do this full time. We are seeing more and more of those professionals either applying for jobs or even just organizations creating jobs for them because they see the value and this very limited resource of legal design professionals today available on the market. Oh, we are seeing also some of them starting their own consultancy solo within a small group of practitioners to be able to deliver legal design services. So what we see happening today is more and more legal design positions being opened, but we have to be aware that there are a lot less options than a traditional legal job. So I'm not saying you can easily find a legal job tomorrow. I mean, you could if you're really motivated, if you have acquired the knowledge, if you have a portfolio, then you can convince an employer that this is a great value. And I have seen many people doing that. They were working as traditional lawyers in a law firm or in a legal department and sharing the value of what they have learned about legal design and the result that they could get. They actually got promoted, they got to become legal designers. So it does happen, but we are still at the beginning. What we see is every single year we see more and more job opportunities, legal departments looking for legal designers, legal design agency hiring legal designers too. So we're seeing more and more opportunities. So obviously there are opportunities, but you need to position yourself well to be able to seize them. And the best way to do that is to show you have practiced what you preach, so that you have a portfolio where you share, look at the design I have done of this contract. It doesn't even have to be a work you have done for a real client. Of course, it's always better if you can do it with a real client. But in the beginning, usually it's a bit difficult, right? So you would need to practice, just like what designers would do. They don't wait for the first client to do logos. They do logos so they can get the first client, right? So we need to do that as well. We need to start practicing the skills, making those visuals for contract, redesigning workflows, what we call service design blueprints, and then show that in the portfolio. And that makes it a lot more convincing for people to consider your application and to hire you.
Great. I think that you put it absolutely well, just like keeping on, honing and practicing that skill so like you could just jump in and use it when there is a need. The next question is, this is one I'm actually very curious about personally. Do you have to be a lawyer to practice legal design, or is it an open field for other professionals as well?
So that's a great question, because legal design is all about collaboration and working in a team where you have different expertise. It is actually very rare that you will find legal designer that can do absolutely everything, meaning doing the design professionally, doing the legal analysis professionally, doing the testing, the prototyping, building the technology. It is very rare. It does exist, but usually, even if you have the expertise, you would hire people to work with you on the project, given we have everyone has limited time. We have 24 hours in a day and 365 days in the year. So you need to be efficient. And the best way to be efficient is to hire other experts that can help you and bring this expertise for you. So what we see is we see more and more lawyers becoming legal designers. working in collaboration with other experts. We also see designers who have no legal background being interested and working with lawyers to do that. So we do see non-lawyers in this market helping lawyers use the methodology hand on hand. So again, the key here is collaboration. So if you're a non-lawyer, non-lawyers would understand that they need to work with the lawyer to make sure that they comply within, within the law. So you don't need to be a lawyer to be a legal designer. I think legal designer name, I don't like it so much, a legal designer, because if you really want to be a legal designer, you would need to be a qualified lawyer and a qualified designer. And there are very few people that have done that in their career. There are a few, but you don't need to do that. You need to work in collaboration with designers or with the lawyers so you can unlock the creativity and really be more innovative in the way you work. So does it answer the question?
Yeah, I think you answered it perfectly. Yeah, you did.
So yeah, and maybe I could add something that is, you don't need to be we see more and more job offers where it is not required for you to be a registered lawyer. So sometimes we see offers where legal background, but not necessarily being a practitioner, a lawyer, like having a legal background, having a legal master, or whatever kind of legal background, but not necessarily being a lawyer, because it's all about, again, the collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like bringing in and leveraging the skills of other professionals into law as well. I'm imagining, like, I think lawyers can do a lot of really cool work if they just collaborated with like a visual designer, someone that thinks visually. And that could be a lawyer, or that could just be like, a design.
Yeah, so there are lawyers specialized in this. So you could get specialized in, as a lawyer, creating those visual communication pieces or those visual contracts. But you could be a designer, and you could be doing this in partnership with a lawyer that would know the local laws. So it's so fascinating, the opportunities that we have, because also with legal design, given it's a universal human-centered methodology, the legal design is not necessarily attached to a specific jurisdiction or even a field of law. So it's the same methodology, it's the same process you would use if you were in the United States, or if you were, say, I don't know, in Japan or in Brazil. You would use the same steps, because those steps have proven to work. Because before using legal design, there was design thinking, and design thinking had been here for decades and has been used in so many industries. And now we use it in law and we call it legal design, but it's the same methodology that is centered on understanding the needs of the users, thinking creatively about the solution, prototyping the solution, and testing it. And so what's great about that is people who work in legal design work with clients all around the world. Because their clients know the local laws. They don't need to learn the local laws. They have already the clients. So it's about using the existing knowledge and not reinventing the wheel, and being more efficient that way.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. Like, not reinventing the wheel, but like, borrowing and taking, from what has already been done, and like using it and adapting it to your own templates and formats. I love that. I actually have a follow-up question just about that. Just thinking of legal design and its importance, apart from communication, I'm also thinking about the business element of legal design. So Tessa, how do you think businesses can actually leverage legal design to, and including law firms, of course, to create this unique identity of their own, like, just using specific types of design techniques that really puts them away from from other law firms or other lawyers?
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing more and more lawyers leveraging this methodology to create a very unique approach to practicing the law. And so when we talk about personal branding, that's what legal design helped us achieve. Build a personal brand that is so different and that is so effective, because also of showing that this works. It's not just more beautiful or more visual, but actually it works better, that actually people understand better the information, they're able to use the information more effectively, and that potentially lead to better business outcomes. Well, at times it's very difficult to prove the correlation until the business outcomes, but at least to prove that people can understand better, that is pretty easy to prove that and to measure that. And so when you, as a lawyer, you start using this methodology to create some contracts that can be potentially very different, but still very effective, then obviously you create an amazing brand for yourself, because it is very difficult to do those things, because it does require a lot of creativity. So once you reach that point where you have enough creativity, enough experience and understanding of the methodology to be able to do something that is super different, super effective, and that users really enjoy and find that it's more useful for them, then of course you create a blue ocean for yourself, because nobody can have those skills or this visual style. So this is where it gets super interesting and exciting for people that have this creativity, that have this creative vibe or interest into creativity, to create something very unique. And so we do see many legal designers that have developed amazing brand, and it's just so unique and so amazing and so inspiring, and everyone get inspired, and everyone is kind of playing with its own skills and talents. So you don't have to be like them, because there is only one. You can only be yourself. So the idea of legal design is also to understand what are your talents and skills and interests. You know, the ikigai, I don't know if you know the ikigai concept from the Japanese concept of, you know, finding what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what the world is getting to ready to be paid for. Then when you find this ikigai, this sweet spot, then there's only one, it's you. And so then it's great for, if people want to work with you, then there you are.
Yeah, and what a wonderful way to say it. I'm going to remember that, and I'm sure our listeners are also taking notes. But what a wonderful way of putting that. Just like finding out what is needed in the world, and just like being that person who can contribute to that. And wow, so meaningful. No, this has been wonderful, Tessa, chatting with you. I learned so much about legal design. I think it's a fascinating field that I'm personally very interested in, and I'd love to continue the conversation with you. And on a note to end, Tessa, what is next for you and Legal Creatives? Are there any exciting projects you're working on?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you again for having me, and for all the questions from the audience as well. I appreciate that. Well, the next step for us is we have a legal design immersion that is coming up in September. So those of you who may want to dive deep into legal design, I would be so excited to have you in the program. And next year, we're going to have, I think, really good, because I've been running Legal Creative for 5 years now. We started online before the pandemic, imagine. So we have lots and lots and lots of material available on the platform. And so next year, the idea is to consolidate what we already have and make it even better to support the community. So it would be like a big cohort we would have early next year, where we would go through different steps to be able to empower lawyers who would like to use the legal design methodology in their day-to-day work. Not necessarily becoming a legal designer, that is more for the immersion with certification, but people who want to use the methodology to start making some small or bigger changes in the way they practice the law. I think this could be very exciting. So this is the next step.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to that, and I highly encourage listeners to check out the future projects of Legal Creatives as well. Thank you so much again, Tessa. It's been wonderful, and thank you to all our wonderful audiences for tuning in and for all your questions. Really appreciate them. We're here every Thursday with more amazing guests, so stay tuned, and thank you so much, everyone.